All right, let's dive right in. We're going to talk about a moment in the teachings of Jesus that was, well, it was a real turning point. A moment that started with some words so challenging, so divisive, that they basically changed everything for anyone who heard them. Yeah, this quote really sums it up, doesn't it? I mean, think about it. People were loving what Jesus was saying. They were in awe of his life. But then he says this. And for a whole lot of people who were following him, this was pretty much the beginning of the end. So you have to ask, right? What on earth did he say that was so difficult to hear? And more than that, why do those same words still draw such a sharp line in the sand for people today? That's really the big question we're going to unpack here. Okay, so it all kicks off with a prophecy. And we're not talking about some vague, this might happen someday kind of prediction. No, this was a stark, incredibly personal declaration, and it caught his closest followers, the people who knew him best, completely off guard. And this is a really crucial detail. For the very first time, Jesus just comes out and tells his disciples exactly what's going to happen to him. Up to this point, he hadn't been this blunt about his own death and resurrection. So for the disciples, man, this was brand new information. And it was, you can imagine, absolutely shocking. So he just lays it all out for them, a four-part prophecy. First, he says he has to go to Jerusalem. Second, he's going to suffer there at the hands of the leaders. Third, he's going to be killed. And fourth, he'll be raised on the third day. But, based on how they reacted, it's almost like the disciples only heard the first three parts. The suffering, the death, they seem to have completely glossed over that whole resurrection thing. And this is where things get intense. This news leads to an immediate, super emotional outburst from Peter, his number one guy. He actually pulls Jesus aside and, well, he basically chews him out for saying it. He's trying to protect him, right? He says, "No way, this is never going to happen to you." But that reaction, that's the trigger for everything that comes next. And what comes next is just a stunning reversal of roles. Jesus' reply to Peter is honestly one of the most intense things he says in the entire Bible. And it really pulls back the curtain on this deep, deep conflict of purpose. Now, to really get how heavy this moment is, you have to remember what happened just a few minutes before this. I mean, we're talking literally moments before this whole argument. Jesus had given his disciple Simon a brand new name. And it wasn't just any name. It was a title of incredible honor. He called him Petros. It's the Greek word for rock. Peter was supposed to be the foundation, right? The solid ground the whole church would be built on. I mean, that's a pretty big deal. But then, after Peter tries to stop him, to pull him away from his mission, Jesus hits him with a completely different label. It's just a shocking turnaround, from being the foundation to suddenly being an obstacle. He calls him a scandalon. That's the Greek word for a stumbling block, a hindrance. So think about that. In just a few minutes, Peter goes from being the rock to being the thing you trip over. And this is where you can feel just how serious this is. Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." Now, hold on. He's not saying Peter has literally become the devil. What he's doing is pointing out that Peter's mindset, his way of thinking, is now acting like an adversary, totally opposed to God's plan. So you've got these two completely different mindsets clashing. On one side, you have God's way of thinking, which is focused on this whole redemptive plan of the cross. And on the other, you have man's way of thinking, which is all about avoiding pain and suffering. When Peter tried to save Jesus from that suffering, he didn't realize it, but he was actually siding with a purpose that was the complete opposite of God's. So Jesus takes this really intense, personal moment with Peter, and he pivots. He turns it into a lesson for everyone. He actually calls the whole crowd over and just lays it on the line. Here's what it really costs to follow me. And this right here, this is the core of it. This isn't a friendly suggestion. It's presented as a non-negotiable condition. If you want to follow me, he says, you have to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Okay, so what does that even mean? Well, you can break it down into three things you have to keep doing. First, deny yourself. That means say no to your own self-interest, your status, your comfort. Second, take up your cross daily. Notice that word daily. This isn't a one-and-done thing. It's a constant commitment. And third, follow him. Go where he goes, walk the path he walks, no matter what it costs you. And then Jesus just lays out this incredibly high-stakes choice. He basically asks, what's the point of gaining the whole world? All the money, all the power, all the stuff, if in the process you lose your very soul? It's a stark contrast, right? What you can get for a little while versus what you could lose forever. Okay, so this brings us to the real heart of the matter. All these difficult, challenging words, they're not just said to be harsh. They serve a very specific purpose. They act like a giant filter. Yeah, the whole point of these words is to create a clear separation in the crowd. They're meant to sift through everybody and distinguish between two very different groups of people who are drawn to Jesus for completely different reasons. And this is the distinction right here. You've got fans of Jesus and you've got followers of Jesus. A fan wants comfort more than a cross. They like the idea, they admire him, but from a safe distance. A follower, though, they choose the cross over comfort. They're all in, 100% committed, because they get that his journey of suffering and sacrifice, well, that's their journey too. See, a follower might do all the same stuff a fan does. They'll listen to the teachings, they'll show up for the miracles, all of that. But there's one absolutely critical difference. A follower is willing to sacrifice. They're willing to suffer. They're willing to pick up their own cross, whatever that looks like, no matter the personal cost. And we see a perfect example of this back in the first century. You had these huge crowds flocking to Jesus. But for the most part, they were fans. They were there for the free lunch and the amazing light show, the miracles. But as soon as the teaching got hard, as soon as the real cost became clear, poof, they were gone. And that's really where this leaves us. These shocking words, the ones that demand we deny ourselves and embrace sacrifice, they still act as a filter today. Which leads to a pretty profound final question, doesn't it? What exactly are these words filtering for? And when it comes right down to it, on which side of that filter do you land?